All right, you are set.
All right, well, thank you, Ashley, and welcome Kelly and Cecilia. And to everyone out there that's listening via our webinar or through Facebook, I appreciate you jumping on this tonight. March Disability Awareness Month is what we're going to be talking about, a little bit about the month, but more importantly, just about our efforts as a community to be as inclusive as possible for all people, regardless of their lived experiences. And so tonight, I can't think of two better people to have that conversation with than Kelly Hartman from Outside the Box, as well as Cecilia Coble, City Councilwoman here in the City of Fishers. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm going to start, before we get into all the things that are happening in our community and all these efforts. Kelly, tell me, you've had a career serving people with a variety of abilities and have a strong passion for this. I've known you now for several years, and you've always been an advocate. And I guess I've never asked you why. So can you tell me how it is that you brought yourself to this particular subject matter and have been so passionate about it over the years?
Honestly, it was a big fat mistake. This is not what I was supposed to be when I grew up, or what I thought I would be when I grew up. But I know, I mean, God has a plan and I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. I actually had a career path set towards inpatient adolescent psychiatric work. And 2 weeks before I was to go off to Atlanta, Georgia and, begin my career, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And at the time, and my mom lived, it was a great ending to a tough time. But at the time, I was working at a group home because I thought it would look good on my resume. And so I just fell into it. And the people that worked at the group home were like, hey, you want to stay here? And so I fell in love with people who learned differently than I, and who maybe had some, extensive challenges of achieving their best life, and just found that to be an exciting use of my efforts to see people achieve the best that they could, even though they might have had some challenges. So it is just something I get excited about every single day. I still get excited about seeing people succeed and changing lives, and been doing that for 32 years.
32 years. And so I mentioned Outside the Box, but can you just share with people what is Outside the Box?
Outside the Box is a program that was developed to support folks after high school. We have a lot of individuals who have different abilities, who may not quite be ready for college. They may not quite be ready for full-time employment or trade school, but they still need a little bit of training. But after high school, most families are like, and now what, right? I mean, there's got to be more. You can't just stop high school and not have social opportunities and opportunities to learn. And so Outside the Box was developed in 2008 to be different than other day programs. There are many day programs across the state of Indiana. Outside the Box is the only day program that is waiver funded and focused really on 4-to-1 programming, community-based programming, and peer matching. I didn't go to Ball State and say to the first 3 people I saw on the sidewalk, hey, you want to be my friends? You start to want to be with people who have similar values as you, or similar goals. And that's what Outside the Box was built on. It's a curriculum-based program for folks to really achieve their best life.
I want to circle back to this concept of kind of integrated community approaches to folks with disabilities. But before we do that, Cecilia, you've been kind of synonymous with this whole movement here in our community, this effort to raise awareness and be a voice for folks with disabilities. Can you talk about how you've come to be an advocate, and what has motivated you to do this work?
Sure. Well, one of my daughters, my younger daughter, Krista, has autism and intellectual disabilities. And so as a parent of a child with a disability, it can be emotionally draining, psychologically draining, financially draining. And I wanted to always help families. And so prior to being on the city council, I helped with a support group for families with autism, getting them connected with resources and getting medical support and diagnosis and things like that. But during when I was running for city council, my mother-in-law also had a stroke and it left her paralyzed. Half of her body was paralyzed. She uses a wheelchair. So in our family, physical disabilities has also been a part of our lives, you know, with my mother-in-law. And so I just had this desire to try to do more at the local level, because there's so many challenges still that need to be addressed at the state and national level. And I thought, why not in Fishers? We have a lot of families that come and move here because of the schools, because of the direct support programs that are available to people who have autism in particular, but various disabilities here. So this is just near and dear to my heart. And sometimes parents, they don't have the time. They can barely get through the day. And so to be able to make a difference in our community is just, it's been amazing. And everyone's just excited to, people that live here are just like, this is the only community where we've, you know, been able to see a change and see that we're building something to help people.
Well, and to that point, some people may know this, but I love watching documentaries, and I'll watch a wide array of documentaries. The only type I won't watch are things about aliens. That's just one I won't watch. I'm not into that. But I watched a documentary maybe a month or two ago talking about the history of institutionalization in our country. And so, you know, there was an effort for a number of years where we sent people away that either had cognitive disabilities or even physical disabilities to these homes. And my understanding, as policies changed and people started to see the conditions of those facilities, there's kind of this pendulum swing that came back to say, you know what, no, we're going to deinstitutionalize people. But when we do that, don't worry, because we're going to put all these systems in place that are going to take care of these people as they integrate back into our community. And so we went from a public policy perspective that was house them, shelter them somewhere out of sight, out of mind. And when we did that, we didn't take care of those people well. People got very upset about that. And we swung the public policy pendulum over to the other side, which is put them back into the community at all costs. But then, you know, we were supposed to put all these support mechanisms in place to allow them to have a successful integration back into our community. So Kelly, you know, when you talk about community-oriented programs, you know, to me, we're living in that policy era of trying to deinstitutionalize and keep people integrated in our community. But can you talk about what the struggles have been around that concept to date and what that means for like a community like Fishers?
I mean, how long do I have? That's a pretty loaded question, Mayor. The struggles are that we are in a public policy phase of trying to integrate people into the community. And in doing that, we're, as providers and as, you know, a community, we're looking at ways to integrate folks and follow federal rules in doing so. The challenge currently is that we're in a huge workforce crisis. And while Indiana does not have any institutional beds, 36 states across the country still do. They still have locked facilities. And so when people really, really struggle behaviorally or with psychiatric illness or something, and it's tough sometimes to continue to integrate those folks into the community. And so right now, the biggest challenge is that for a community like Fishers, there are a ton of families in Fishers that have the Medicaid waiver, which means they've scored the golden ticket, right? They have the ability to get staff come and support their loved one in their homes. But because of the challenges of being in a higher socioeconomic, you know, geography, it's really, really tough to get people to work for $14 an hour in Fishers. So there's a lot of challenges right now to getting that public policy to work. And I would say, given the state of the economic challenges we have in this country, that's going to get harder before it gets easier. But we continue to work real hard at it. And it makes a huge difference to be in a community like Fishers, where we actually have begun to foster an attitude of inclusion as opposed to seeing people with disabilities as a charity. We have begun to see them as a valuable part of our community. And that is a rare find in communities I would say across Indiana. I work all across the state, and I just am so happy when I come home and I'm back in Fishers, because I'm like, yeah, we're getting it. I mean, we're making progress, and that is not true of all cities across the state.
So in that policy framework where things are convoluted and the resources are more scarce than they should be, Cecilia, as a mom of a child that needed those services from time to time, how overwhelming is it for a parent when they first have to deal with the fact that they're coming to the realization that their child may have a disability, and then you have to deal with this kind of bureaucracy and then trying to figure out what services am I supposed to go get? I mean, when you talk to families, and I know you've talked to a lot of them, how overwhelming is that process for a Fishers family?
It can be very overwhelming. It really can. I think as a parent, you go through kind of a denial process. Usually the parents that I've talked to, maybe both, or maybe at least one parent is kind of still in the denial phase. And then what I tell families is that, once you get that diagnosis, then you're able to get services, but so it's important to get a diagnosis to get a doctor to evaluate your loved one, your child. We're lucky in that we do have a lot of resources here, but we still are in need of, some day programs. But the disability community, as it relates to, I think, like autism and Down syndrome within Fishers, we're pretty tight knit. The schools, a lot of these young adults that are transitioning out of high school, they've been together since grade school. So we're getting to know these families, these other families, as our kids grow. And then you leave high school, because kids that have an IEP or a disability can stay within the high school system till they're 22. So my daughter will graduate from high school with a certificate of completion. She's in life skills, and then she'll move on to a vocational program through the transition program at HSC schools, and they'll start to help her with job skills, job shadowing, getting her out in the community, and hopefully getting her trained to do something meaningful that would lead to some kind of an employment. So the beauty of it is that we're starting to build this community, this tight-knit community within our own city, and trying to help each other navigate through these challenges, so you don't feel alone, and you feel like you've got others that can relate and understand what you're going through.
Well, I think that you bring up a great point, Cecilia. And Kelly, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I was reading something the other day that about seniors and as they age, what is one of the number one indicators that they'll have a long, productive life in their older years. And it was social capital. It wasn't like genetics or physical ailments. It was actually human connection of some sort, meaningful human connections. How important is that social capital for the clients that you work with, Kelly, in terms of, beyond the physical ailments you might be dealing with, or the mental health challenges or cognitive capabilities? How important is just social capital, the ability to connect with other humans when you're dealing with your clients?
So it's interesting, because I don't see the folks that we support at Outside the Box as different than I see you or Cecilia. What we know about the pursuit of happiness is it doesn't really matter what country you're from or what your political affiliation is or the color of your skin. I mean, everybody wants to be happy, right? And to be happy, you got to be healthy and safe, but you also have to feel like you're valuable, and you have to be connected to other humans. And so going back to that public policy question and institutionalization, we've spent years and years trying to make sure people with disabilities are healthy and safe and healthy and safe and healthy and safe, which doesn't help them have their best life unless we look at relationship development, connecting families to other families in a shared experience, and finding ways to help people feel valued, whether that is being a meaningful volunteer somewhere or in competitive employment or being in a day program in their own hometown, and those are the things that I think we're working really hard on, because I think all of us will look back on our life at some point, and the thing that will be most valuable to us are the relationships, whether it's with our kids or our best friends or our neighborhoods. And it is really super important. I think it's as important for our folks, if not more important than what we tend to think of in our day-to-day life.
Cecilia, we've talked a lot about this at the council level. We just did a housing study, and what was astounding to me was the demand for senior housing that is almost insatiable. We can't build enough senior housing. And I was talking to the fire chief today, and he was telling me last year, we ended the year, our ambulance runs were up 22% from the year before, which is not that crazy, because the year before we were all in lockdown, so there was a lot less activity. But this year, for the first 3 months of this year, we're already 32% higher than we were last year. And so as seniors, either people moving in here because they want to be near their grandkids, or people that are just aging in place here in our community, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on just the number of people that's perspectives are going to start to change as their abilities start to change as they get older? When you have those conversations with seniors, I mean, what's top of mind for them when it comes to these issues of disability?
Well, I think, accessibility. So a lot of it is, can I age in place? And some of our old housing stock, it's hard to age in place because it wasn't built with disability in mind or aging in mind, where the doorways are big enough for, like, if you have to use a wheelchair or a ramp or a zero entryway, zero entry where you don't need steps to go up. So these are conversations that I think, universal design to design housing so that you can age in place, so that if you become disabled or you are taking care of a loved one with a disability, or as you age, you have the amenities in place, or you're able to put in grab bars, you're able to transition into the next stage in life because your house is accessible and you're able to live there. So I think those are some conversations we need to look at is, can we start designing things so that everyone can use those facilities, everyone can enter a building, everyone can live in this house, and no matter what the circumstances are, they don't have to move. And the other thing is affordability. People with disabilities get a set amount of money per month, and that's supposed to cover food, shelter, and incidentals, and it's not a lot. So where are they going to live that's affordable and accessible? That's a question that comes up for people with disabilities and people that are aging, or our senior community.
Yeah, it's interesting, when we look at how the market drives these things, there's lots of developers out there looking to cash in on the senior population that wants to downsize from the large home into a smaller home, but still pay a significant amount of money to live in those ranch style homes that are more accessible. What we don't hear a lot about are developers that are anxious to go build duplexes and fourplexes and group home type of developments. We don't hear a lot about that. And I think it's mainly because the economics just don't tend to work real well. Although I think there would be a large need for that type of development here in our community. But as we've progressed, we've gone through this journey. First and foremost, Cecilia, you bringing it to light that this was something the community needed to work on. We just recently had a milestone, in my opinion, of this journey where we at the city council, by ordinance, by law, established the commission on disabilities. And to the average person, that may not mean much, but what I think is so important about it is that it will live past you or I, Cecilia, in its existence, right? I mean, you have been a champion for this for a long time, and I'm confident as long as you're in your seat in office, you're going to be an advocate for it. But you and I both know we have a season of leadership, and then someone else will come along. And I think what this commission in law does is say, in perpetuity, or for as far out as we can see, this is a core mission of our community, is to continue to evolve and get better at this. But can you describe to the residents, Kelly or Cecilia, kind of what the commission does? I mean, what do you guys talk about? What are the things that you guys focus on as you guys get together and discuss matters of disability?
Sure. Well, I'll go first. Kelly and I are both the co-chairs of the Fishers Advisory Committee on Disability. And prior to the ordinance being codified, establishing the permanent formation of the Fishers Advisory Committee on Disability, we gathered our stakeholders. So we have, it's really a collaboration, which is the beauty of this, is we have people that are that have disabilities or care for someone with a disability. We have direct support providers, people that provide services for the disability community, employers who employ people with disabilities, the educators and the school system. So we have representatives from all of these organizations and partners, and we work on things collaboratively. So our number one focus too is to try to provide resources out there to the community of what's available within Fishers and Hamilton County. But we're also looking at what are some of the challenges facing people with intellectual and physical disabilities, and how can they have a seat at the table? How can we work collaboratively to ensure, for instance, that our public spaces are accessible, like with new construction, like the trail, and that's an example. And the amphitheater improvements, where someone from our committee was able to be there as this was being designed, and they're able to provide input as to is the path wide enough for someone with that's using a wheelchair. Giving input in those public spaces are really important, especially when we're spending a lot of dollars, to build a beautiful amenities for our residents. We want to make sure that they're accessible. We're working on employment, providing more opportunities for people to be integrated in the community and doing something meaningful, and working with these employers that have all these unmet needs, looking at housing opportunities, housing projects. So we help to get South Point Village going. So it's a great group of people. We've got probably a solid 30 to 35 people that have been working alongside us and involved. And then we seek input from the disability community. I'm sure Kelly could add a little bit more. Kelly, what are your thoughts as you've been working with this committee?
I think for people who aren't involved with our group, I think, like the mayor said, it may not seem like a big deal. So we have this committee of people, right? But when I see how we are a force for change, an example was when we looked at South Point Village, and knowing that there was going to be a significant number of units in that building that were going to be accessible, not putting all of the units together, right? So having all the accessible units being integrated within, so that people could live with and without mobility challenges next door to each other. I had a meeting this morning, and I get teary-eyed. I promise, Scott, I won't cry right this
No crying today.
I know he gives me a hard time because I cry all the time. But I had a meeting this morning with folks from the Parks Department, and the fact that we will have 3 adult changing tables within our parks as amenities is a big deal. and you don't think about that unless you're someone who has to figure out how you're going to go and experience a park or experience anything between bathroom breaks, right? I mean, we have a number of folks with mobility challenges who may need that accessible bathroom beyond an ADA wheelchair accessible bathroom, but someplace that's a step above that. And the fact that we're going to have that in our city is really cool. So I feel really proud of what the community, how the community benefits from the work of our disability awareness committee, because I think it's pretty important stuff.
There is, to that point, Kelly, I mean, there really is a difference between meeting the standards of federal law and then being like a thoughtful or intentional design that is inclusive for everyone. I mean, it's kind of I don't want to call it the bare minimum, because obviously our country's come a long ways and it's, standards, but there's still the basic standards, and you can go above and beyond. But I think to your point, it takes a perspective to be able to be intentional about those things.
Sure.
What, I've often wanted to ask this group about something, and that is when I talk to a lot of residents and we talk about these opportunities around the disability awareness group and interacting with residents with varying degrees of abilities. Most people, well-intentioned, but terrified to say the wrong thing, terrified to even approach someone who may act different, look different, what have you. So I have really two questions. I mean, to the person who is very apprehensive about making that connection with a neighbor that has a disability or what have you, what advice do you give them? That's my first question. The second question might seem a little odd, but I hope you understand it, where I'm coming from. Where does, in all of these heavy discussions, all these difficulties and adversities that you see people have, where does humor come into the conversation? So first question is, what is your advice to people who are well-intended but just really apprehensive about how they interact with someone? And the second thing is, in your work, in your body of work, whether it's Cecilia in advocating in public policy, Kelly, whether it's your work, where does humor fit into what otherwise can seem like a very heavy subject?
Go ahead, Cecilia, you go first.
Well, we've talked about this in other years when we've celebrated and we've recognized March Disability Awareness Month, is that treat people with disabilities just like you would like to be treated, in people first language. People with disabilities are people first, and so look at it that way. And then they happen to have a disability or a challenge, or so it's this is Johnny and he has autism, or treat them just like anybody else. I mean, I think there's terminology too that we no longer utilize as well, like mongoloid, those things. So one of the things that we do during March Disability Awareness Month is we have an ally toolkit, and it has information, and you can find that on the website, of frequently asked questions, just like you're asking, Mayor, about how do you talk to people with disabilities? How do you make sure that you're respectful, and that you how do you engage in these kind of sometimes conversations that might be uncomfortable for people? But first and foremost is, treat people like you want to be treated, as a person first. And then humor too. There's a lot of, while there's things that are challenging, it can be kind of funny. For instance, which at the time it may not be funny for families, but like my daughter's in unified bowling team at Fisher's High School. So we had she had her first bowling practice there, and the parents usually, they're there to pick up the students, and they're hanging out while they're practicing. And there were two young kids, and kind of, I don't know, showing, being funny and kind of inappropriate, I guess, with what they were doing with, and I tell the mom, I'm like, look, and she's like, oh my gosh, and just so sometimes, people with disabilities don't always act appropriate with their peers, right? And they, so, you just kind of laugh, like you don't want them acting that way, but you kind of laugh about it, and you kind of,
You have to have moments of levity, I'm sure,
that's
right?
not an appropriate behavior, whatever, with a peer. And but it can be funny too, just things that you're like, oh my gosh, it's I guess it's par for the course sometimes when when you're trying to make sure that your loved one, your young adult, is acting appropriate the way a 19-year-old should, and not acting like a 5-year-old. But that happens sometimes. But we use a lot of humor within just the caregivers themselves. Sometimes we're watching over each other's kids, and they get into these situations, and it's like, oh my gosh, we gotta get over there and figure it out, because this is not appropriate. But then we laugh because you have to. It gets you through, and sometimes laughing with somebody that gets the situation, it helps, I guess.
Well, Cecilia, you and I are both in politics, so we know a lot about people that are adults that act inappropriate like 5-year-olds. So we're pretty accustomed to that in the world of politics. But Kelly, I mean, what are your thoughts about those two questions?
So, the really interesting thing is that we spend an awful lot of money, both state and federal dollars, to build a service delivery system that tries to teach people with disabilities how to be included in their community. And what we don't spend any money on is teaching communities how to include folks who might be different than they are. And so the first thing I always say to people who are just a little bit like, I don't know about that, this person's different than me. And that's not just disability. That can be a lot of different cultural experiences, different kinds of people, just different experiences of humanity in our community, is acknowledging that it's okay to be afraid and it's okay to be unsure. I think one of the greatest things about March is that we provide so many different ways for people to dip their toe in the water if they are afraid or they're not quite sure. There's a lot of events where you don't have to dive headfirst into the community of disability, but to become more aware through some of the things that we're doing. It is pretty good stuff. I mean, me, I think humor is in everything. And what I find is that I spend a lot of time with the individuals that I'm very close to and that I support who happen to have disabilities, laughing at people who don't. So, because, that's the thing, is like, sometimes you just can't imagine how silly people are. I mean, everybody puts their pants on the same way in the morning, and it doesn't matter what your diagnosis is or what might make you different. I think what we don't realize on a day-to-day basis is that more than 26% of all people that live in this country have a disability of some kind. That's a lot of people. That's more than 1 in 4. And whether it's mobility or cognitive, vision, hearing, daily life, 26% of all people in this country have some sort of disability. And so, and chances are all of us have, we all have things we're not great at. It doesn't mean there's a diagnosis with it or a label that I can slap on it. But I'm not great at every single thing, So I think the best we can do as far as giving advice to people is to put yourself out there. I think the greatest learning comes from being uncomfortable, no matter whatever you're doing. But, get to know somebody. And I think, a lot of people will be like, oh, my next door neighbor, I know that their daughter has autism and I just don't know what to do. And I think I could speak, Cecilia, you can back me up on this. I'd much rather a neighbor go by and say, I'm not really sure if I can help, but tell me if I can, because I want to be a good neighbor to you. And, to fumble through a conversation awkwardly is much more full of grace than not saying anything at all.
To that point, Kelly, and I think that's well said. What the group that we don't probably spend enough time talking about and identifying ways to support are the caregivers. And that can range. I mean, we often talk about this as parents and kids with different challenges, but you may find yourself a spouse to someone, Cecilia, like your mother-in-law, where all of a sudden your loved one has a stroke or a heart attack or a car accident, and you went from being equals in the household to now being the caregiver. And so, you know, from both your own experiences and then talking to so many different people, what's the next chapter? You know, our health department is starting these peer support groups where we're going to try to build those connections between different folks. And I know you two have worked on that, but where do we need to go as a community to really put the tools in place to help the caregivers?
Sure. Well, I'm just super proud again with the health department, the Fishers Health Department. They've been doing a community health needs assessment, and they sat down with the disability community, and they did a call out asking for feedback on caregiver support, and it was overwhelmed response in terms of there's all kinds of support needed, whether it's someone with a disability or someone taking care of an aging parent. The key is getting people connected. I believe when you feel like you're not alone, you thrive, you feel better. I'm excited about what the department's going to do with caregiver support. Prior to COVID, right before COVID hit, a group of parents and Mary Kennedy came up with an idea to start a social club for young adults with intellectual disabilities called Thrive Social Club. It has been a hit. And we started, right before COVID hit, and we were doing the best. We did everything through Zoom, and then we started getting together as things opened up, and we're getting families from other communities, wanting a club in their area. And we got our 501c3, and I'll tell you what's nice about this group is that it's mostly a lot of empty nesters like myself who have a young adult in the family now that can't drive, that you want, especially during COVID, there was so much isolation. You want to be able to get out there and continue with your friendships and do fun things. And so that's what Thrive Social Club does, is we get out there, and it's been great because we're getting to know the caregivers. We're getting to know the parents of these young adults with intellectual disabilities. So we're sharing the joys and the sadness and the challenges. We're talking about, what we could do, collaboratively, maybe in the future. So a lot of great conversation, a lot of connectivity is happening. And I see this in our community right now, that we have an opportunity to really engage folks and offer support. My goal, honestly, when it comes to people with disabilities, is that we all get to know each other. So that we can lean in and help each other with some of these challenges that we might have, and help support each other. And I've seen it with people that have had accidents where their life has changed, and maybe they're in that initial recovery mode, and they don't have the support. And I've been trying to connect families with others who have been through those experiences to help them get through that recovery stage, to help them find the resources for therapy and support. And so I think building that community is really important in all stages in life when it comes to caregiving.
I think those are great points, and we do have a couple of questions from the audience I want to hit you guys with here, and by all means, anyone on Facebook or on our webinar, if you have a question, feel free to post those, and we'll make sure to answer them. But Kelly or Cecilia, what options exist for adults with disabilities who desire to play, let's say, intramural sports like softball or kickball? And then a follow-up question to that is there support for coaches and volunteers on encouraging kids and adults with disabilities who want to play sports? So, when it comes to kids getting out and being athletic, or people in general wanting to be out and be athletic, especially Cecilia, you brought this up, as kids transition out of the high school environment and now they're out there, but they still want to recreate, what's your honest and candid observations of those opportunities? Do they exist in our community today? Should they exist in our community? I just want to talk about that.
Sure. Well, during high school, for instance, Fisher's High School, they have a unified sports program, and it's amazing. So unified means there are peers, and those students with special abilities or different abilities, and they play on a team together and compete with other unified teams. So for instance, there's unified bowling, there's bocce, there's track and field, and it's a IHSAA, sanctioned sport where these students can actually letter. So like my daughter was in the unified track team, and they got runner up in the state. Fisher's High School did this past year. So this program is also part of a program that's called Champions Together, which is part of also Special Olympics. So they're kind of a supporter of these teams, unified teams within the high school. So it's growing, and we do have a unified team at HSE High School and at Fisher's High School. And once you graduate or you leave high school, the Special Olympics of Indiana is just amazing. So the Hamilton County Special Olympics is very strong. They just did the polar plunge at Eagle Creek to raise money. So a lot of the young adults, and they compete in various sports. There's a whole list of competitive sports that you can be involved with through Special Olympics. And there's adaptive sports teams like hockey. There's the Twisters. It's a hockey league for people with disabilities. There's a program in Fishers called Show Team. It's a rhythmic gymnastics dance team that practices here in Fishers. So they are out there. The Prism Project of Fishers. It's an adaptive art. It's a theater and art program. So there are programs out there for people. I think we can do more, a little bit more, but maybe Kelly could add a little bit more of what else is out there. But those are the ones that we've been involved with.
Yeah, I mean, Special
Go ahead.
Olympics obviously comes forthright to mind. I think it's also interesting. Sometimes the sporting event opportunities are specific to disability. So we have a number of things that would be specific to power wheelchairs, specific to visually impaired folks, specific to folks who might be have hearing impairment. So there are things out there. I think there should be more. I think there'll be opportunity when Fishers is able to move forward with their rec center, where we have sort of a hub where community and sport can come together, and it will offer an opportunity for more integration.
Another question we got is when it comes to seniors and they're being caregivers, is there active meetings going on now for that caregiver support where they can share knowledge and frankly vent at times if need be? I know that our health department is starting this, and I was just in a conversation today about this regarding leveraging some other organizations like the Shepherd Center that might be involved in that. But do you guys have any further information in regards to those availabilities?
We had our first meeting, and it was, I'll be fair, not a lot surprises me. It was gut-wrenching for me. There was a lady who is caring for her very elderly parent and can't go to a family member's wedding because she can't leave her mom, you know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
I know from that meeting, we were supposed to launch into the next phase, but I have not yet heard what that is.
Well, I think that's a good segue. So as we are always trying to push forward, we're always trying to get better. You know, in the last few minutes we have together this evening, I guess I'd be interested to hear from the two of you, you know, ideally with the next chapter in Fisher's story around becoming more inclusive. What are the, you know, one or two areas that you really think we should focus on to continue to improve? Kelly, what are your thoughts?
I mean, hands down, you know, my number one is that people in Fishers need the opportunity to be in a day program that also offers job coaching full time, so that we can, you know, we have pieces and parts, but we don't have a full-time day program where after high school, people have an opportunity to continue learning. I don't know of any of us that wake up and say like, oh, I'm going to go create my best life in Shelbyville, or I'm going to go to Mooresville. You know what I mean? Like, people want to age in place, and people want to live and love and learn in place. And so hands down, I think Fishers needs to have a day program for young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Cecilia, what are your thoughts? What would you like us to focus on?
Well, interesting you ask. You know, I was just in Arizona and I went to tour a development for individuals with intellectual disabilities. It's a housing development called the Treasure House, and it was started by the Kurt Warner family, and they're looking to expand. And it's almost like a senior living community there, you know, where they have someone that drives the people that live there, and they have activities. They get 2 meals a day, lunch and dinner. So it's an interesting concept, and there aren't that many of these kind of developments in the country. But we need more housing options. We need more South Point villages, but we also need maybe to look at what kind of housing we could do that would provide a little more support for people that don't have exactly that independence to live in that kind of structure. So we're looking right now, there's a group of parents that we're looking at, you know, what's out there, what models are out there. So because we need more housing at various levels of care for people with disabilities, you know. The other thing we're trying to do is just build more awareness for employment opportunities or work opportunities for people with disabilities. And then, as always, I think this goes with just anyone, even a person that doesn't have disabilities, that, you know, transportation in Hamilton County is a little bit you know, lacking, I guess. So, you know, what can we do? And I'm so glad that Fishers is doing this autonomous vehicle program, and one of the vehicles is accessible and available for people with disabilities through this May Mobility pilot program. And so I feel like Fishers is a place where things happen, and I feel very fortunate that Kelly Hartman is working alongside me, heading the Fishers Advisory Committee on Disability, and I think we both can say that we feel very fortunate that we live in a community like Fishers, and with a leadership like you, Mayor, that I think we're up for the challenge to kind of look at some of these challenges in a different way and come up with some solutions, some examples that can be replicated throughout other communities and throughout the state.
Well, I think that's well said. And I have to say, I know, Cecilia, you mentioned this the other day at the opening remarks of March Disability Awareness, but there are a lot of other communities that are now looking to the two of you and your committee and the collective body of work that you represent, and trying to identify how that they can move forward. And that's really, I think, a testament to just the progress that you've made to date. But, you know, to your point, Cecilia, I think the great thing about Fishers is that by no means is good enough for us, and we'll continue to push the envelope and try to evolve and develop this and continue to create a community that really is the broadest definition of community and inclusive to so many. So I'm excited to see what you guys do in this next chapter. One final question that came up, and this is actually a really good one. Is there a newsletter or correspondence, routine correspondence for, let's say, caregivers? You know, the ability to routinely touch base. You know, hearing that question, I think I know the answer, that there isn't one to date, at least coming from us, but it does sound like a really unique opportunity to share information with individuals moving forward. Are you aware of any type of
Well, on the Fishers website, we do have resources that are available, and we're constantly updating that. We're trying to provide what's available for people with disabilities and their caregivers. So if people go to the Fishers website there under accessibility, it'll provide resources and things. I think Kelly and I are just excited to continue the conversations with the Fishers Health Department to see, you know, how the Fishers Advisory Committee on Disability can help with establishing, you know, a set caregiver support meetup, being a part of addressing, you know, how we can better support people who are caregiving for someone who is aging or has a disability. So we're excited about having those conversations and continuing to look to see, you know, how this could work out and what's the best way to support people. What do you think, Kelly? I think we're just in the middle of those conversations right
I think we're at the beginning stages of what that's going to look like with the Fishers Health Department. I know one of the suggestions that came out of that group was just having a way for us to share what needs people have. You know, it may not be that I need you to come sit with my 95-year-old grandmother that I'm caring for. I might just need you to pick up a bag of groceries for me, you know, and finding a way to go back to that social connection issue. How do we get a network built in a way that people can communicate? And I fully believe that will come out of that forward thinking initiative that the Fishers Health Department's working on right now.
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of passion around, and really, I think that's at the forefront of preventative health and public health. You know, if we're so much of this, when you swim upstream and you realize, well, if you have positive social connections and you have the ability to get to resources, the emergent things, the really bad things that we have to deal with when 911 gets called and lights and sirens are coming, they start to diminish because we've dealt with these things before they ever become an issue. So I do think that that's a huge part of like the next generation of public health. Just going forward, if someone was passionate about this subject and they're like, man, you know, Kelly and Cecilia, they're my kindred spirits on this issue. Is there room on the commission for additional people? Like if they want to get involved and they want to get energized, you know, how do they channel that and to help be a part of what you two and the rest of the commission are trying to do?
Sure. So we have, like I said, committees, and so we're very open to bringing in as many people as we can. Like I said, we need ideas. We need to work collaboratively. So if people want to get involved, they can reach out to either Kelly or I. Send me an email. Ross Hillary, our ADA coordinator, fields inquiries that come in, and he'll forward those emails on to us, and we get people plugged in. We're meeting on a quarterly basis. Our next meeting will be in April, and if you sign up for to receive the City of Fishers newsletter, the city's providing everybody that information of when the meetings are, and we're just encouraged that more people will get involved because we need people at the table. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Well, Kelly, Cecilia, it's 9 o'clock. It's a Monday night, so I'm sure everybody's tired already from their first day of work this week. But you two really are the definition of what can happen when citizenry decides to take an initiative upon themselves and really try to push the envelope to serve their community better. And I can't thank you enough for that. And to the rest of your colleagues on your commission. And I look forward to continuing to work with you guys. For anyone that's interested, by all means, check out our website so you can find out all the great activities that are happening this month. And most importantly, if you're someone who is looking to connect or you're just struggling around issues of disability, by all means, reach out to any one of us. These two will take your call in a moment's notice. I know that about both of them. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And Cecilia and Kelly, I will see you soon.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Mayor. Have a good night. Thank you.